Get started. And so today we have a very distinguished visitor and a friend who came all the way from Cleveland. I think some of us have been to Cleveland once or twice. He was happy to come here because it still snows in Cleveland, as far as I know. But anyway, Dr. Waldo is a world expert on, among other things, atrial fibrillation. In recent years, he's done some remarkable work in atrial fibrillation using this model of sterile pericarditis, where he causes an inflammation, pericardial inflammation, that then causes an induction of atrial fibrillation that can be studied in detail. And before that, he's done a lot of work on things like pacing and entrainment, and very basic research at the level that is immediately translatable to clinical application. For some odd reason, Dr. Waldo moved from Birmingham to Case Western Reserve. We've been there as colleagues for many, many years together, which were wonderful years. Before that, he was in Birmingham, Alabama, and before that, he did a postdoc with Brian Hoffman in New York at Columbia, when there were people there like Michael Rosen and Andy Wynn, I think all at the same stage of postdoctoral work with Brian Hoffman. And before that, you received your MD in New York, State University in New York. And before that, he did his undergraduate work at Cornell University. So now we're happy to have you.
Well, thank you very much. For me, it's a pleasure. Actually, I have to be honest, it's bittersweet for me, because it's always great to see Yoram and Igor and Dr. Sui. They're a superb group, and the reason it's bittersweet is because we lost them. Your gain is our loss, and I'm not bashful about saying that. In fact, the reason I came to Case Western Reserve really is because of you, and it was a very fun for me. It still is, I hope. But Yoram was the main reason. We met in study section, and Yoram said, "You should come to Case," and I said, "Okay."
You have to know, every time things went bad and things were not so good in Case Western Reserve, it was my fault.
But it's very nice, and yeah, and actually. I know that one of the things that I think I'm pleased with my career is having started in a basic lab with something like Brian Hoffman, and I actually stayed there 6 years, because when I left I was an assistant professor of pharmacology, and so I had a bunch of time there, but I was a fish out of water in those respects, because I still am a clinician, but I've had the great opportunity, as smellers like Jack Warner, who were able to live in two worlds, as it were, the clinical world and the basic world. Of course, the basic now is molecular. If you do anything with the whole heart, people look at you, and it's a little strange. But it's been great to take problems from the laboratory, from the patient bedside to the laboratory and back again. That's how I have viewed it, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do that. And I want to share some of that with you. A bunch of observations, principally from our lab, about mechanism of atrial fibrillation, and a little bit of flutter, because I want to share they're related. But I want to tie that together with an overview, really, of mechanisms, because that's what Yoram asked me to talk about mechanism of atrial fibrillation. And I think that's a good idea. So I called it Insight into Atrial Fibrillation Flutter from studies in animal models and patients. So it's not just my studies I'm going to talk about. But let's just start with the list. I usually don't like lists, but we're going to start from the list anyway, because we're going to start with the concept of multi-regional wavelets. Now, I want to do some of this chronologically too, but the concept of multi-regional wavelets is probably familiar to most of you. It was a concept of Gordon Moe and Applestock in a paper that they published in 1959, so it's a while ago. And I'll show some more later about David Scherf, but actually what Moe did was repeat the work of Scherf. who had put a conatine on the atrium. And a conatine, as we now know from studies done later on at two Japanese laboratories, a conatine in the atrium causes abnormal automaticity, and it makes it go very fast. And when it goes very fast, it fibrillates the atrium, because the fibrillatory conduction will get into that. But anyway, Scherf had put a conatine on the atrial appendage. I'll show that. And then what he did, he made either fibrillation or flooded, depending on how fast it fired. And when he clamped the atrial appendage, the fibrillation stopped. Or if he cooled the atrial appendage, the fibrillation stopped. Because when cooling prolongs refractory period, those rapid beats couldn't get out. Or if he removed the aconitine, it stopped. So Gordon Moe repeated that. Most people don't remember. The first part of his paper, he repeated it and confirmed what Scherf had shown. But then he did something else, and he took the technique of Hebel Hoff, who was a long, well-known name in cardiac physiology. Hebel Hoff had shown a long time ago, back in the 30s, in fact, that if you stimulate the vagus and then introduce premature beats to the atrium, you make fibrillation. And so he made fibrillation like that with vagal stimulation. And then what he did was he cooled the atrial appendage and the fibrillation didn't stop. And he clamped the atrial appendage and the fibrillation didn't stop. They said, you see, this is a different mechanism. It's not the same as Scherf said. But he didn't do anything more than that. Very few recordings, certainly not electrograms or things like that. But he looked at the atrium. And the atrial, we know when we went to medical school, or anyone in any physiology class, the atrial always described it looking like a bag of worms when they're contracting in fibrillation, because it's chaotic, this uncoordinated contraction. And he said it looked to him like Brownian motion. That's the right term he used. And so he thought it made sense that they were multiple reentry wavelets, and it was then the term later from Hoffman, Rose, and Witt, my colleagues at Columbia when I was there, who used the term random reentry. And so after that, Moe, 5 years later, published a paper in which I think he made the first computer model of an arrhythmia. I don't know if the Russians actually made computer models of figure-eight reentry things, but I don't think they called them arrhythmia. But anyway, first computer model of an atrial arrhythmia. I think that's right. And you can see, without going into too much detail, and especially for the biomedical engineers, I couldn't do that. But when Yoram and I gave a postdoctoral course for many years, and the students used to repeat this experiment, it was very easy to do. But all these are all randomly reentrant wavefronts. And he said you had to have over 30, I think it was 35 or 36, in order to sustain the fibrillation. It was a critical number you needed. Well, it stood that way for a long time until Alessi came along. And I don't know how many of you know Maritz Alessi. I had the privilege of actually working with Maritz on my sabbatical back in 1981. I was there when he did this work. And by the way, the work on the show was published, never published in a peer-reviewed journal. It was published in a book. But anyway, it would have been published had it been peer-reviewed, I'm sure. Alessi is a seminal force in the field. And Alessi had, by that time, mastered the technique of multiplexing and could record from 192 electrodes at any one time simultaneously. And this is one of the figures from that chapter in the book, where these are electrodes. He called them eggs. They look like strawberries to me. And all those little dots are silver electrodes. They come out. But what he did is he took a dog heart and he made a Langenau perfusion. And then he cut off the ventricles and he inserted this end through the tricuspid ring and seated it in the right atrial appendage. And this was on the septum. He took this end and put it in the left atrial appendage via the mitral annulus, and this was facing the septum. And he had 480 leads in each one of these eggs, so there were 960 electrodes. And with the computer, he can make various permutations and combinations of the 192 leads. He could go from the right or from the left, or from inferior leads and superior leads. And what he did is he gave I call it industrial strength atrial proline. We'll talk about that because most people use atrial proline to make atrial fibrillation use very, 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 very large doses. Certainly, industrial strength is appropriate. In any event, when he mapped, he said he confirmed the multiple reentry wavelet hypothesis. And this is looking at the left atrium and the right atrium, a superior vena cava, the right atrium. These are the pulmonary veins in the left atrium. And you can see you have these multiple reentrant wavelets. There's 7 here. And he said you needed, I think it was 6 or 7. No, 5 to 6 at any one time, not something in the 30s. But you still needed a critical number of randomly circulating reentrant wavelets in order to sustain the tachycardia. Now you'll notice what random reentry is. It's not closed-loop head-tail interactions. That this random reentry wave will re-enter the pathway that was previously activated by that one. In that sense, it's reentry, but it's not the formal reentry that most people think of, which is a closed-loop. And in fact, if you look, this is from the paper still, and this is just 10 millisecond snapshots, he called them, out of the 300 milliseconds of the activation wavefront in black traveling in the right atrium. And you can see how the random reentry it was, no head-tail interaction, but this, the 180, 190 millisecond intervals, there was nothing in the right atrium that you could see. And when he recorded both atria simultaneously, so 192 electrodes, you lose a lot of resolution when 192 is not a lot either in these days, but it was a lot then. But if you have to split it into 2 atria, you lose a lot. But still, you'll notice that there was no head-tail interaction. These impulses bifurcated, they collided sometimes. Sometimes they seem to come epicardial. They seem to be generated from a site that you couldn't tell how they came through. And he was reporting endocardial, so we thought it was an endocardial breakthrough. The left atrium is thicker than the right, that might happen. But anyway, here's the right. You can see there are occasionally head-tail interactions. This is around the right atrial appendage, goes around once in the second time. But it's unstable and not very. So this was multi-reentry wavelets. Now I'd like to put this and skipping way ahead. And Jack Monod essentially involved in a lot of this stuff. But this is the work that Jimmy Cox's first maze operation. And the maze operation was predicated on the notion that all, and Jack will correct me if I'm wrong, but at that time that's what everyone believed, that all atrial fibrillation was due to multiple reentry wavelets. I think we probably can safely say now that there's probably more than one mechanism, maybe several mechanisms of atrial fibrillation. And it's remarkable that most of the mechanisms that in subsequent models that have looked at atrial fibrillation cannot be explained, I don't think, by multiple reentry wavelets. And don't forget also what's very important, what Alessi did, and even what Gordon Moe did, was they studied normal atria acutely. That's very important because most of the time atrial fibrillation, not all the time, most of the time atrial fibrillation is present with comorbidities, particularly cardiac comorbidities, when they're abnormal. So let's look at this. What he did, this is the right atrial, the right atrium and the left atrium, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. These are the pulmonary veins. These are all incisions that Jimmy Cox made. Now this is a drawing, but this is what he did. You notice even endocardial. And the idea that, as I understand it, and as I think I've heard him explain many times, the idea was that there were multiple reentry wavelets. If you make an incision and then sew it up, it repairs by scar. Scar doesn't conduct. So multiple reentry wavelets, when they bumped into that scar, they would terminate, and therefore you wouldn't have atrial fibrillation. And I believe that was it. Later on, people began talking about compartmentalizing the atria. In fact, I was at the meeting in London that John Camp had when that we used that term. I chaired that session and in fact suggested the term amongst others. But even so, we still thought that the reason this seemed to work was because of multiple reentry wavelets. But I'm going to make a dramatic statement now and tell you that since these studies of Moe and Alessi, nobody has demonstrated that multiple reentry wavelets is a mechanism in spontaneous atrial fibrillation in patients or in animal models. I'm not telling you it's not a mechanism. I'm suggesting it's not very common spontaneously, nor in most models. I think the old notion that Brian Hoffman taught me years ago, if you can make a model, there's almost surely a clinical counterpart. The point is, how frequent is it? Is it very rare? Is it 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 10 or 1 in 5? Or 99% of the mechanism of atrial fibrillation? I think this is probably going to turn out to be unusual. You know, the last thing I'm going to say, and this will come back to it, is you can see one of these incisions. I'm not sure it's one incision, a series of incisions probably, but it circled the pulmonary veins. And in the late 1990s, 1998, I think it was published by Hessegier, a seminal observation was made that there exist pulmonary vein potentials, and potentials in the pulmonary vein of very short cycling, which is very fast, that can precipitate and even maintain atrial fibrillation. And that was one of the first ideas about the trigger, where's the trigger that causes this. And the notion of a driver, also the pulmonary vein being a driver, firing very rapidly and causing fibrillation. We'll get back to this several times. So that's the concept of multi-branch awareness. Then we'll go into the concept of fibrillatory conduction. Now, I think that Jack One will recognize this because it's from Jimmy Cox's work that got published. I mean, your work really with him, where he made a very, very important model of atrial fibrillation. His model was mitral regurgitation. That's a very difficult operation. You know, if patients have acute, the way he did it is he made mitral regurgitation by cutting porting. If that happens in patients, they get acute pulmonary edema. It's potentially high morbidity, mortality, I should say, and I think that happened with those two. Yet enough survived, and they did some studies. And these are some representative examples. These are the summaries. I have chided, I think Jack, but for sure Rick Schuster on this. Very important work, but when they publish, they never show more than two beats on one cycle, and it's always frustrating for me. But if you look here, my interpretation, not theirs, this with two examples of what they saw. You see this unstable reentrant circuit in the right atrium. It's different each time, but it's head-tail interaction, and it's very fast, and you get activation of the rest of the atria in a different fashion each time. And what can happen if that's a very short cycle length? If the rest of the atria can't follow one to one, you get fibrillatory conduction. And this is also work Jack Quano did with Jimmy Cox, and they were the first to map in the operating room atrial fibrillation. They took patients who would come open heart surgery for ablation of Wolff-Parkinson White syndrome. What is that? That they had an accessory AV connection between the upper and the lower chambers, atrial ventricles. And usually the patients who came, we didn't have catheter ablation at that time. And the patients who came usually were patients who had terrible arrhythmias, usually atrial fibrillation. But the atrial fibrillation rates are over 300 beats a minute, 350 beats a minute. Most of those beats don't get to the ventricles because they usually have to go through the AV node, which filters them out. They go pretty fast in the ventricles, but not over 300. But with the accessory connection, virtually never having any tissue that's going to slow the impulses down, or tissue that, if the refractory period is very short in that accessory connection, you can get rates very, very fast, over 300. Atrial fibrillate, people still die from it. So what we had to do was map that in the operating room, cut them. But in a series of I forget the exact number now, but I think it was 8 or 10, they had, how many, Jack, was it 56 electrodes, I think it was? And they had designed plastic with electrodes embedded that fit in Bachman's bundle, fit on the left atrium, the right atrium, and they induced atrial fibrillation. There were several different things that they found, but I selected this because there's 2 consecutive cycles, just when the atria are open from on the other side. But I want you to concentrate here. Right atrial appendage, left atrial appendage, pulmonary veins. I want you to see here's the impulse going around once, and here it goes around a second time. And you'll note that the activation sequence of the atria is different each time. And I'm suggesting that unstable reentrant circuits can act as drivers, and I'll show you some examples of that in patients and in animals. This is some work done later by Karen Konings and Mara Salesi and the group in Maastricht in the Netherlands. Same patient population as Jimmy Cock and Jack Guano did it. That is, patients coming to surgery for Wolff-Parkinson White surgery, for ablation, surgical ablation, accessory connection with the atrial fib. Now, what Alessi did, he didn't record for both chambers simultaneously. He took a big soup spoon and put lots of electrodes in it. And it's sort of like a cup idea. And he put it on the right atrial pre-wall and the posterior left atrial, the left atrial pre-wall. And he recorded during these induced episodes sequentially. And he showed 3 different patterns of activation, but I want to show you one of them, which he called leading circle reentry. But you'll notice it's functionally induced with the line of block in the middle. You go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, closed loop reentry once, and here's the second one. And you can see how that looks when he records. very, very fast, 138, 127 milliseconds. When you pace at 127 milliseconds, you're pacing at a rate that's almost 500 beats a minute. If you pace any atrium at 500 beats per minute, what's going to happen? You're going to fibrillate the atrium. Why? Because you have a driver, the pacemaker externally firing rapidly. The rest of the atrium can't follow when you fibrillate. And I'm going to suggest that this is one of the mechanisms. And we studied this pretty well with Koichiro Kumagai in our laboratory in canine sterile pericarditis. Now this model we've been studying now, it's almost 25 years. It was stimulated. We were stimulated to do this by taking care of. When I was in Alabama, we had a superb surgical program. They did. By the time I left, we were doing 3,300 operations a year. When I came down in 1972 from New York, they were doing 1,500. And the patients, about a third of patients roughly get atrial fibrillation in front of postoperatively. And we noticed two things: that they follow the time course of sterile pericarditis, and well, that's the main thing. In fact, we actually reported from temporary electrodes on the epicardium. We noticed unfiltered current of injury. So we said, well, the pericarditis is critical. Let's make pericarditis in the dog and see what happens. In fact, that's what I did in my sabbatical at Alessi, and we made then a model of atrial fibrillation. And we then recorded simultaneously from about 400, a little over 400 electrodes in the heart. So just look there. These are 1,200 millisecond windows. This is we then took the right atrium and folded it out. So this is with the left atrium. So that's the left atrial appendage, the pulmonary veins, right atrial appendage, superior cava, inferior vena cava. Okay, and so it looks a little faded here. But this is looking at the right atrium with a hole, a window in the right atrial field, because we had multiple catheters here and we're recording from there. What I want you to notice is the color. This is orange. It goes around once, and a second time, and a third time, and then it stops, and then it comes back again. Okay, and this side length is very short. You notice it goes around here, the pulmonary veins, once a second time, that disappears, and then it comes back over here and over here. And in fact, a very important one is going up the septum and down the free wall, much like atrial flutter, but it's not constant, as you can see. It's not here, and it does different things. And in fact, you can sometimes get 4 of these simultaneously circulating unstable reentrant circuits. And we looked at the mean cycle length was 110 milliseconds. That's a rate of 550 beats per minute. On top of an abnormal substrate pericardial inflammation, it made fibrillation, and we suggested that it made fibrillatory induction. And when it stopped, well, as you can see in these 12 windows, it's starting to get here. Every 100 milliseconds, you see there was only one circuit going, and without taking too much time, just to show you, it finally petered out. There was nothing. There was nothing to drive the atria. None of these unstable reentrant circuits. It stopped. And when we looked at the data, there were, in sustained fibrillation, there were almost always 2 circulating reentrant circuits. Mean over time was 1.4. But most of the time, there were two of these unstable circuits. They disappeared and they reformed, as I showed you. They were very fast. Now, if we took the animals and we tried to make fibrillation and couldn't do it, what we found was that we never got any of these unstable reentrant circuits at all. And here we are out to 12 100 millisecond windows, and you see it just peters out. So unless you have, in this model, and this is one mechanism, I'll show you a second mechanism. So we think that there's evidence in people and in our animal model that one of the mechanisms of atrial fibrillation is unstable reentrant circuits that form, disappear, and reform. There's an interaction between, if you will, some randomly reentrant circuits, but they're not randomly reentrant. We suggest that they're being driven by the driver, the unstable circuits, and that when the unstable circuit stops, these things reform. So we said, when we looked at this, Koichiro and I, we noticed that Hoffman's bundle, that is the roof of the left atrium that extends to the right atrium, was critically involved as a crossroad in most of these unstable circuits. Here's one for the left atrium, 7% of the time, around the superior vena cava, 5% of the time. Then up the septum and down the free wall, 56% of the time, and sometimes just up here and down like this, they go up the bottom 6% of the time, and sometimes around the right atrium, 20% of the time. So the bottom line is that 2/3 of the time, Bachman's bundle was a crossroad. So we said, well, we think we understand this mechanism. What would happen if we made a big lesion here? And we did. And when we did, we never got sustained atrial fibrillation. And this shows you, this one lasted almost less than 600 milliseconds. So we published that in JACC some years ago now. And actually this was repeated by a group in Oxford Clinic with a pig model, and they got the same thing. Well, what's the point? The point is, we understood the mechanism, we thought pretty well. I was going to say exquisitely well, but that's too strong. We understood it, we thought pretty well. And we said, what's the vulnerable part of the circuit? And we went after it. Now, why do we do this? If you think of one of the major advances in clinical electrophysiology, it's the introduction of ablative therapy. Ablative therapy directed at what? A vulnerable anatomical component of a reentry circuit. When we went for Wolff, Parkinson, White, we ablate the accessory AV connection, so that's AVRT. When we want to ablate AV nodal reentry tachycardia, we go for the slow path. We want to ablate atrial flutter, classical flutter, we go for the submutation isthmus. For ventricular tachycardia, we call it the Wilbur tachycardia. We connect the mitral valve to the infarcted area that doesn't, etc. We don't isolate triggers. Yoram talked about snow. He knows about snow because he lived in Cleveland long enough. When it snows, how do we treat it? We put salt on the ground. We treat the substrate so you can do things, or we shovel it out of the way. We don't try and prevent the snow from falling. I think that's not a very good analogy, but it serves a purpose. And what's happening now, we'll get back to several times, is that with the seminal observation of Hesseger about the pulmonary veins, and I've alluded to it already, the target is the isolation of the triggers, which is very hard. And as I'm going to try and emphasize several times, the mechanism in people is maybe known in part, but mostly all the components have not yet fit together, and there seem to be a lot of missing components. And so the approach now is ultimately, all the therapies really, is empirical. And for sure, I think we have to say that the original maze operation was empirical. It made assumptions. I'm suggesting that one of the best parts of that was that they that they isolated the pulmonary veins. And we'll get on to this more. So I'm just suggesting another thing. I'm not telling you this is how common this is in people I know. But I'm suggesting that this fulfills the notion that we're always better off when we understand the mechanism and what do we attack a vulnerable component of the substrate. So there are clinical implications of understanding mechanism. Now this is also from Alessi's laboratory. In that same Langenor perfused model where he made multi-reentry wavelets with acetylcholine, many times he got this reentry around the left atrial appendage or the right atrial appendage or inferiorly in the right and left atrial. And virtually all the time the cycle length of these things was less than 100 milliseconds. A cycle length of 100 milliseconds is a rate of 600 beats per minute. But in this model, with so much acetylcholine and such a short refractory period that made, you can make the refractory period well less than 100 milliseconds. And Pepe Henriquez does it, so we'll get to his work shortly. You get 1-to-1 activation times, but if you had something like this going around, you would get fibrillatory conduction. This area might be going around the atrial appendage, but the rest of the atrial couldn't follow when you have a driver like the patient. Now this is Rick Schuster's study. Rick Schuster took the right atrium of a dog part and put it in a tissue bed and perfused it and superfused it. Added big doses of acetylcholine again. And this shows the 6th, 7th, and 8th consecutive maps after induction of fibrillation. What I want to show you here in the inferior right atrium is look at this figure of 8 reentry circuit going around and around. And if you will look at the activation of the isotopes, they're all different. And look how fast this is. This is 45 milliseconds. I mean, that's not physiologic. That's not even pathophysiologic. That's due to industrial strength component. But it still makes the point that here's a micro reentry that might be very hard to pick up, by the way, medically, especially because we don't have the resolution that Rick Schuster had in his tissue. So another example of a driver, and this in vitro. Now we come to Pepe Alife. Pepe has made a very important contribution, I think. He studied sheep parts. Now you have to know that sheep parts are convenient in many ways, but they're not considered a very good model for humans because they're so selective. The age is so selective, they're very good. And it's easy to make atrial fibrillation in sheep parts. But he gave industrial strength vascular propane, and I really mean industrial strength. And then he did optical mapping. And here you can see he made what he called left atrial flutter. He had closed loop reentry going round and round, very, very, very fast cycling from this what he called a pseudo electrogram of left atrial. But look at the simultaneous recording in the right atrial, 2 consecutive beats, fibrillatory conduction. And he suggested that atrial fibrillation could be due to what he called the rotors, but I mean, I think it's classical reentry, whatever else you want to call it, whatever anyone would call it, the rotors, fair enough. But the point is not to argue about that, whether it's a rotor, the point is it's a driver. And it's taken to the rotor. Now, in our lab, when Koichiro Kumagai left, his colleague from Fukuoka came, Dr. Matsuo, Hirohiko Matsuo. And he said, you know, sometimes when we induce the fibrillation, we did it with closed chest initially. We left electrodes on different places in the several pairs, 3 pairs as a rule. He said, sometimes I get this, look at perfectly regular from the roof of the atrial, but look at that, 96 to 98 millisecond cycling, really fast, over 600 beats a minute, with the same morphology. And it's fibrillating here and it's fibrillating here in 3 left atrial and the right atrial veins. So, of course, we did a map that, and he did a series of those. And this is one example. We could, here, let me show you, I did a little faded in this slide, particularly, but you can see recording from sites A, B, C, and D is completely regular at 96 milliseconds. E and F were also regular, and G and H had fibrillatory conduction. We did not map in between here. This is our extrapolation from our data that we think this is range around the left superior and inferior pulmonary vein. But the point is, it's completely regular. Completely regular. And it's a driver making fibrillatory conduction. And I'll show you in a moment, you can taste that and interrupt fibrillation. No more driver, no more fibrillation. If you give a drug, we gave 2. We gave T-Sotalol, we gave Flecanon. There was a young investigator finalist of Nanagan, then called NASPI. And what happened is, when the fibrillation stopped, it was after this thing disappeared. And there were permutation combinations. It didn't only have to be left superior and inferior, it could be around all in the center. There were variations. And here's an example, in fact, that Rob Goldstein and now Sergei Rukevsky, who's a Russian, by the way, he's a very good guy from Kiev. I guess Ukraine, still Russian. Here we are, where we put, this is a post-chest dog. This is an ECGD2, right atrial appendage, posterior left atrial. It's fibrillating here. We're pacing from Bachman's bundle. That's the 3rd pair, where it was perfectly regular. And you can see, this is 500 milliseconds. So we pace for a couple of seconds here, and when we stop pacing, you can see no more fibrillation. Back to the side, back to the side. You can see the fibrillation. So, the notion that you can interrupt atrial fibrillation with pacing was not just randomly done. We thought it was reentry, and we thought if we got the reentry circuit, we could interrupt. If reentry circuits have an excitable gap, whether it's fully excitable or partially excitable, you get into, you should be able to. Of course, interruption of a rhythm per se doesn't mean it's reentry. It could be triggered. And our notion is that triggered rhythms have never been shown to go that fast. So we're thinking that's probably reentry. Nevertheless, we have to finally prove it. We have, in this dog model, we have yet to be able to map the whole circuit. We can spend more time if you want to. If it's been a problem with putting on electrodes and pericardial reflection, how you do it in situ. It's not so easy, we don't think. But the inverse solution would do it with a left atrium. In any event, there's more to say about this as well. But we have examples where we have it coming down on this way one side, and then the next time we have it coming down this way. Same idea. So we think we have a lot of other examples. We always have an RS. We never have a QS, so we don't think it's coming to the same time. We think we have some indirect evidence to support it. It's not yet the solid foundation I would like, but we have a lot of data to support the notion it's probably dangerous. Okay, so now we're dealing with fibrillatory conduction, reentrant circuits of short cycling, and we showed you two types, unstable reentrant circuits and stable reentrant circuits. Okay? But now what about an ectopic focus firing rapidly from the pulmonary vein or somewhere else? And that gets back to David Scherf, which really was started out. I don't know how many of you ever heard of David Scherf, except a few of my friends. He was a giant. He had taken Benkelbach's chair in Vienna. And with the Nazi Anschluss in 1938, he came to the United States via London. He was very grateful to get to the States at all, and took the first job that was offered him, which was at Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital at New York Medical College, where he stayed, practiced, never had a grant, raised money to fund his animal laboratory, and was active until the day he died in almost 80. Remarkable. I got to know him very well because when I was with Brian Hoffman at Fort Payne, Scherf had just retired. It's a long story. I want to share the whole thing. Ego won't be interested to know the whole story. But in any event, they said, here's a treasure that we should take advantage of. So twice a month, we met at Cranefield's place, which was the Rockefeller then Institute at Rockefeller University. And we would present our new stuff, and then Scherf would get up and talk. And for 2 years we did that. And I picked them up every night. We went and brought them to the meetings. So I got their own person. And in fact, he gave me the galleys of Exorcistes and a lot of everything that I have to show. Anyway, a remarkable man. And this was a conitine again. And when he put it here, this is an example of flutter, where with the atrial 1-to-1, this wasn't firing that fast, and there's no fibrillatory conduction. In fact, this data was used to support the notion that atrial flutter is due to a single focus firing rapidly. We know that that's not true, but atrial tachycardias can be. They're usually slower than flutter. And that's one of the distinguishing characteristics. But there is a mechanism of a single focus firing rapidly, be it abnormal authenticity or topical authenticity or some kind of what may be triggered. But this, of course, was really a conitine. When it went fast, it made no sense. And then we get to the work of Tessier. It was a seminal paper published in the New England Journal in 1998, I think it was. And which, now what happened is, it's very interesting. The history is very interesting, and some of you history buffs will enjoy it, because after the success that Jimmy Cox was having with the Maze operation, a couple of people, principally a guy who was then in the military, decided that we could do endocardially what he was doing epicardially, which is drag the catheter and make these big long lesions and make the same kind of lesions that Dr. Cox was making. And so a lot of people started to, quote, play, unquote, the left atrium, including Tessier, which is remarkable. And his catheter wound up in the pulmonary vein sometimes. Like he said, look what I'm recording. And what are these potentials doing in the pulmonary veins? Here, and then they make fibrillation. And he did things systematically. And in that article in 1998 in the New England Journal, he showed that most of them are from pulmonary veins, mostly from the superior pulmonary veins that trigger the fibrillation. Sometimes on the right side. We now know they come from the superior vena cava. It was Andy Witt, in fact, who showed that this is thought, by the way, to come from fingers or sleeves of atrial tissue that go up the pulmonary veins. Andy Witt showed you can get this in the mitral valve and tricuspid valve as well. And in fact, some people think they can do it sometimes. And so this is what led to the initial ablation idea of let's go into the pulmonary vein and just ablate until there are no more. But they didn't read the surgical literature, which said travel to the pulmonary veins with pulmonary vein stenosis and pulmonary hypertension, which is a very bad disease. We convert a nuisance from like fibrillation to something really serious like pulmonary vein stenosis, and that been largely abandoned. But anyway, this was at least an attempt. But this was an attempt to get the trigger. atypical migration for most successful ablations. Well, I want to put this up. This is from our work. Jason and David published this in Circulation in the operating room. It's too complex to go into it completely, but we had 9 patients who came to the operating room with chronic atrial fibrillation. And here's a patient with atrial fibrillation for 10 years. And when we recorded, look what we found from these sites: A, B, C, and D, the left atrial. That's the left atrial appendage, right atrial appendage, superior inferior medicated filter veins. What you see superimposed here is some fast Fourier transforms, which I'll get back to in a moment. At sites A, B, C, and D, look how regular, 154 to 156 milliseconds. That's very fast. That you fibrillate the atrium. If you have 150 is a rate of 400. If you pace the atrium 400, you'll have fibrillation. Well, we think that's what did it, and the rest of the atrium fibrillated. And you can see with the fast Fourier transform, you get these single tight fast Fourier transform peaks, these narrow peaks, as opposed to the reduction which is wide. You get something. So the bottom line is 10 years, and that's what it was. Now the surgeons were making these maze procedures were now maze 3. I'll show some maze 3 after, or modified maze 3. But my point is that we really haven't understood what's going on. And now we know from the work of a lot of people, no surprise, that when the atria are going very rapidly for prolonged periods, what happens? They dilate, they fibrose, all kinds of intracellular changes, calcium accumulation, that has major effects on the physiology. You get substrate change. So there's a lot to learn, but we were really surprised because the old notion was you go from paroxysmal to persistent to permanent atrial, and people were saying, well, paroxysmal persistent atrial might not be due to alteration of wavelengths, but permanent atrial ablation probably is, because you get short refractory periods. And it turns out when you really look, we saw in 7 out of 9 patients this sort of thing. In 2 patients, I didn't show the slide, but in 2 patients we saw things that we couldn't explain before. It almost looked like there were parasystolic activation areas. Adjacent areas went very slow and some going modestly fast. The other thing that we found is, this is 156 milliseconds. We saw some of these at 300 milliseconds. I'm sorry, rates of 200 milliseconds, rates of 300. In other words, at rates that ordinarily you'd expect the atrial to follow 1-to-1. Atrial flutter, the capacity rate 300, the atrial follow 1-to-1, because we're doing reduction in that way. And why would we have a driver causing fibrillation now, many years of atrial fibrillation? We don't really know. We're presuming it's the driver. And if it is the driver, why would that happen? Our notion is, our acting hypothesis is that there's so many changes in the substrate that now a slower driver will still be. That has to be managed. So my point is that for the clinician who's ablating, be it surgically or medically, we're always smarter when we know mechanism. And if it were easy, it'd have been done already. It's very hard to do this in people, especially in the catheter, where you're limited the number of electrodes you can place, the resolution you can get. And techniques like your arm's technique for the inverse solution would be terrific. And there is some work that's been done endocardially to do these sorts of things. But even that hasn't yet come to a big solution. Now, I just want to say one more thing, because, I said at the beginning of my lecture that one of the things that I was really pleased to do is go from the patient bedside to the laboratory and back. I think that's what stimulated much of it, almost all. And one of the things I always remember was a problem of understanding it. All those patients we did in Birmingham all got atrial cardiac blocks every year. Over the 14 years I was there, I counted once it was over 20,000 patients. We were the arrhythmicists. We saw so many of them who had arrhythmias. It was not uncommon for a patient to come from mitral valve surgery with fibrillation for years, who comes out atrially paced, and they can pace them for 2 days or so. And I never figured out why that was going on. I still not sure I understand. But now I've decided that maybe I have an idea. That maybe when you go into the surgery and then you cool they cool the heart down to 25 degrees or so, centigrade. So the heart stops electrically, becomes dead. And so then when they warm it up, there's no more driver. So So there's no more fibrillation. And it takes a couple of days until the fibrillation starts up again. The pathophysiology returns, and you get fibrillation. Because the surgeons used to be very happy for a couple of days because they could pace the atrial and get some atrial contribution cardiac output, and maybe they control the treatment very nicely. And Pritchard knows he saw some. So maybe that's the explanation. So this is from Alessi's work of some possible mechanisms. So just a bit of a summary. Here, he says an automatic focus firing rapidly. He suggests maybe for the pulmonary veins. So people think it's an automatic focus. I don't know. I would say it might be abnormally automatic, but I don't think it's cardiac. So I really think if anything's going to be triggered, we'll see. But then he calls it the mother wave, and that's what we think Matsuo thing was, and the Tepe Heliphase thing was. It's a single reaction circuit going very, very fast. A fixed flow reminder is the same thing. The idea, though, is it latches onto something going around stable in the same place. Moving rotor is what we call unstable reaction circuits. I'm only suggesting that there's several of them, and that's what he puts down here. So multiple sources, multiple foci, more than one. Bruce Stambler has a model of heart failure, and Bruce Stambler's in our group, and has a canine heart failure model, which he finds sometimes two different foci going at different rates. You can make fibrillation that way. In fact, using a radiator to show you can make it. If you do that dimensionally, it looks like first out of the front. So in the atria too, you can get fibrillation that way. Unstable reaction circuits, multiple reaction wavelets. Alessi still puts that in there, but nobody since Alessi, to my knowledge, has demonstrated that that's present for sure. And then he says a combination, and I think what that really is a driver for fibrillatory production. So now the roles of trickling substrate, and I've been really talking about that already, and that's what I'd like to put this up. And again, he grew up from the historian. This is from Sir Thomas Lewis in his famous article in 1920, and he said he took normal canine hearts and tried to make fibrillation or flutter. He said the chief difficulty is in obtaining flutter or fibrillation when it is desired and of sufficient duration. We know of no sure method by which these long after effects are to be obtained after effect is to sustain them. And this lack of knowledge adds much to the difficulty when it's impossible to say the moment stimulation is withdrawn how long the after effect will last. It is even impossible to say with certainty that an after effect will be obtained. In many cases there will be no after effect. On very many other occasions there will be a short after effect lasting a few seconds or perhaps a minute. On rare occasions an after effect of many minutes duration, rarely of 30 or 60 minutes duration will be seen. The point is that it's trigger and substrate. In a normal atrium, it's very hard to get sustained atrial. It isn't just a trigger. You also need some substrate mostly. So I think we knew this for a long time, and he articulated that very well. And that's why I go back to this. I got this from, my clinical hat. You could ask to give lectures sometimes. Different companies supply, quote, slide libraries, unquote, if you want to lecture. This I found in the slide library. Well, the slide library is often very helpful. If this was an idea that people have been talking about, they put this into a diagram. Paroxysmal atrial fibrillation goes to persistent, goes to permanent. So here's the trigger initiating it, and then you get substrate changes in maintenance. And the idea was that you get permanent atrial fibrillation, and they thought it was all multiple integrations. I don't think so. We know that at all. And there's nothing like data. So now I want to talk a little bit about flutter, because it's very closely related to atrial fibrillation. Because what I've been saying to you is that atrial fibrillation is due to atrial flutter. It's a fast atrial flutter. It's a Halife rotor or a Matsuo reentrant circuit or whatever. It's a reentrant circuit going around. It's just a lot faster than the clinical flutter, which is strong enough to get one-to-one response. So, in my judgment, fibrillation and flutter, in the sense of two sides of the same coin. And I put this up just to talk about it because I'm going to tell you the difference between fibrillation and flutter is when you get a line of blocking communicating. And I think this is very important to understanding mechanism. That's why I put this up. This is from Paco Curcio, which is the first clinician really to emphasize the importance of line of blocking communicating. This is a drawing of typical atrial flutter. The right atrium, the left atrium, superior and inferior vena cava, pulmonary veins, coronary sinus. The impulse goes up the septum, down the free wall, and then through this submutation. This was when he thought there was local conduction. We now know that's not where it is. But he had this line of block, which is functional almost all the time. And it can go this way, which is typical, up the septum and up free wall, or reverse typical, down the septum and up the free wall. And the importance of the line of block. Now let's go back to that, because there's nothing like history, nothing like looking at things. And this again is our friend Sir Thomas Lewis. And this is from his drawing published in, this is from his drawing from graphic registration for art edition. I realize the year is not here now, but this is 1925 was the published book, but this is also published in his articles on art. So, right atrial appendage, left atrial appendage, superior, inferior vena pulmonary veins. You notice we're doing the pericardial reflection here, or anything above do that. It makes it very hard in situ, in vivo, to record between the pulmonary veins. We have done it with catheters and things. We have time to do that. But he used a wick electrode, and he recorded for about a dozen sites, only two on the right atrial, on the left atrial, his left atrial appendage, one site over here on the roof of Bachman's bundle. And when he finally did get flooded, it lasted long enough for him to record for 12 sites, he said the impulse could around the great veins. Around the great veins. And my medical school, as Norm said, was downstate medical center, and I had the great privilege to have Brian Hoffman be my Pritchard, and he was then not at Columbia, but at downstate. And he taught us that atrial flutter is re-entry around the great veins. And that was an old textbook. And it was from this. Well, if you look here, this is a re-entrant circuit. In order to protect the re-entrant circuit, what do you need? You need to have the circuit stable, and you need to prevent short circuiting. So there had to be some kind of block here. You don't see it on the, but when people couldn't be beaters, the booper at Mexico City, Soto Yaris is wonderful. This is Arturo Roosevelt, who's a genius, and Garcia Ramos. They said, let's try and make that block. They took a hemostat, and they just crushed the tissue between the superior and inferior vena cava. And then they stimulated, and when they mapped a bunch of sites, they said, here, it went down this side and back up this side. So they confirmed and said that there was a re-entry of the veins. They didn't record anywhere else. Interesting enough, they made the first ablation. You put a line out here that still got flutter, a line out here that still got flutter, until they went all the way to the AV groove, and then they terminated. Well, this is repeated in Hopkins Lab with Larry Frame and Penny Boyd. And they, instead, this is the superior and inferior vena cava, left and right atrium. They, instead of making a clamp, they made an incision, sewed it up, and then they repeated that lesion that Roosevelt Garcia had made, only up to here, also in sewed it up. And when they made flutter, they discovered, now they had multiple reentry, they had a lot of electrodes to report from, that it would re-entry either clockwise or counterclockwise around the tricuspid annulus. What was important about this was the importance of boundaries, and the importance not only boundaries, but again the principle of preventing short circuiting. So we learned that. And then in our lab, we made the pericarditis model. And this is work from Kikuyu Uno. We initially mapped, when I was in Birmingham, Kano Kimura, where because flutter is stable, even in sequential site mapping, we only mapped from the right atrial free wall, and we thought it was re-entry around the free wall. I'll show you that in a moment. We looked at the septum, and we weren't sure what was going on with it. But anyway, Kikuyu Uno then came, and we were recording 400 electrodes in both atria. And here's an example of flutter in which, let me show you that, this is more difficult. These are the same dogs, superior and inferior vena cava, and in this instance, the impulse goes up the septum. We're looking for the right free wall again. That's it. That's the IVC and the coronary sinus. We're looking. The impulse goes up the septum, breaks through a Bachman's bundle, and comes down the free wall, enters again. So it's single loop reentry, and there's a functional line of block here from between the KV, from the crystal terminalis or the sulcus terminalis, and the spiral aspect of the IVC. It can go the whole way. As it does here, this is that same dog going the opposite direction, up the free wall, down the septum. Here, Bachman's bundle, breaks through here, and again, you can notice this functional line of block. And then, this is a pericarditis model. Now, this is not normal. This is abnormal. And if we had the time, I'd show you Penny Boyd's model. Or I probably should have the slides that I did. Too many slides as it is. Penny Boyd did a tricuspid regurgitation model, and she waited 3 months, the H got really big, and she banded the pulmonary artery. And when she then stimulated, she made flutter all the time. So again, but what I want to show you though is that this is an abnormal heart. It's pericardial disease, transient, it's all inflamed. We've been doing studies on that. In fact, Dr. Effenbach, we have a paper now which was submitted again, won't get accepted. But the endocardium in this is perfectly normal. The epicardium has had an awful lot of damage from the inflammation. And it's experiencing connexons, it's experiencing myocytes, a lot of fibrosis. In any event, because conduction sometimes can be pretty slow here, you can not only get the impulse going down the free wall and up the septum, where it goes very fast because the part is normal, it takes longer to go around here so that you get a figure of 8 reentry, again functional. And this is the same animal going the opposite direction, the same way. So, figure of 8 reentry. Now, why am I spending all this time here on flutter? I'll show you more. This is the last one, also by Tomito, another one I've had a wonderful opportunity. I've had 13 Japanese fellows in my laboratory. Each one of them have made very cool contributions. Tomita did this. We took a normal atrium and made a lesion between the leading cavity. Now, this happens in real life. You take patients who have an atrial septal defect that needs repair, simple defect. Surgeon opens the right atrium, exposes the defect, sews up and closes it. So now you have a line of block here. And a lot of these people get atrial fibrillation, get atrial flutter. And we decided to find out why. Because we also discovered that we looked at our patient, we published it with George Van Heer when he was a pediatric EP at our centers now at Stanford. 2/3 of those patients get re-entry that's typical of atrial flutter. The impulse induces the substation impulse. It goes up the septum, down the femoral. And if you want to cure them, you have to have late substation isthmus, just like we do in clinical patients. But 1/3 of them have isthmus re-entry. It goes around the lesion. In any event, we made the lesion in normal hearts. And what we discovered when we mapped is that we got flutter, and this is single loop flutter. In this case, is going up the free wall and down the septum. But you notice there's a functional extension line of block, in this case, to both superior and inferior cava. It can be one or both. We think the reason is it has to do with curvature. That's what we talk about if you want. But the functional extension of the line of block gives you the atrial flexor. Now, what's the point here? The point here is that atrial flutter is a reentry. But the substrate is not an anatomic substrate waiting to be engaged by the Pritchard. The anatomic substrate, principally this line of activity, forms during atrial fibrillation. So we wanted to, it's interesting that this is the same Gordon-Moe model that I showed you before, the computer model when he made fibrillation. If he made lines of block, he made flutter. Look at that figure of 8. He made lines of block, he made flutter. And so we wanted to find out what this is about, and it was particularly stimulated by this. These are studies from the patient, Terry Cooper and I are still working. All those patients after open heart surgery who had atrial fibrillation and flutter. We asked the monitor techs, please record the rhythm. The patients going in and out of the rhythm. We want to see how it started. And it's very interesting. And we did 27 such patients like that. And this is recording each of you to an atrial electrogram on the right free wall. You can see the sinus beat, another sinus beat, and the rough atrial fibrillation. These are 1 second time marks. And you can see here, sorry. Okay, so here's the fibrillation. This is continuous. Still fibrillating, suddenly becomes regular, and stays regular, it's atrial flutter. In 24 and 27, I did that. I'll show what happened the other 3 shortly. In fact, this is what happened the other 3. Here we're reporting we had 2 electrodes. This is on the epicardial aspect of the first and bottom bundle, premature, a sinus beat, premature beat. Now look, it's perfectly regular. Before this is a type 2 flutter, one type of moment. And then all of a sudden it went one step to classical atrial flutter. But if you look at this, this is perfectly regular. But the ECG, any clinician will tell you, Jack Mono especially, this is atrial fibrillation. In fact, when I presented this in the Association of University Cardiologists, George Birch said, yeah, you said that's flutter, but the ECG is fibrillation. And it took me years to figure out how important that was in the morning. I'll show you. And it's this. And this is done by Aki Fushimizu, you know, a terrific guy who is now a big boss in Japan. And this is now just going to right atrial free wall. And this is the superior cave, the inferior leading cave, and the right atrial appendage. And this is the last of the train of 8 beats, pacing from here. And then we put in a single premature, and then a second premature, and then spontaneously was in fibrillation. And you can see how these are all 10 millisecond isotones. And here, so this is beat 4, it's the first spontaneous beat. Here's beat 5 in the sequence, and it's still fibrillating. And you begin to see that the isotones are getting closer in a slow conduction. And here too, you can see there's a line of block forming here. The 6 beat, you can see that is in very slow conduction here, but then these two beats come around and collide. And then finally, this time, it blocks here, and this comes around, and now we're going to flutter. And really what it's doing is going around this, and that's the line of block between the cavity, inferior, superior, the cave up here. And this impulse also goes like this, the bottom bundle, down the septum and back. So that's the fibrillation. So what happens is that during atrial fibrillation, a functional block forms within the cavity. You get flutter. And why we spent this much time on electromechanisms of atrial fibrillation? Because the difference between whether there's fibrillation or flutter is whether or not that line of block forms. Now, I'm shortly going to San Diego, and I'm getting data on Honolulu. Some of you remember her. She was a wonderful gal who was, as a medical resident, was interested in what we were doing, and came down to our lab. We did some studies in which we repeated this study, making lesions in the cavity. But now we did it in a pericarditis dog. I should have shown you, but I have too many slides there, but I'm going to tell you. So now we have the abnormal substrate as well. And what we first did is we made fibrillation. We had what we call Matsuo fibrillation. There was a driver down here on the left atrium. Okay, it was an abnormal driver making fluid through conduction. We then made a line of block in the cave, and we started up the pacing again, the reverse pacing, and moved to fibrillation. We think that's what the initial rate is probably last a few seconds. And guess what happened? Now that we had a line of block anatomy in that area, we had functional extension and it made atrial flutter 80% of the time. And 20% of the time, the left atrial driver formed even though there's a line of block. And the line of block didn't extend to the cavity and stay fibrillation. So that's why I'm saying that the difference between atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter is that line of block between the cavity that forms. And we have more data. This was done by Jose Ortiz in our laboratory. We looked at spontaneous and adenosine-induced atrial fibrillation. And I'm not going to get late, and this is a lot of consecutive cycles from A to J. But what I want to show you, just the right atrium is superior inferior median cable, line of block, and look what happens. That line of block disappears. In fact, here is not even present at all. It goes to fibrillation. So when the line of block disappears, flutter goes to fibrillation. And when the fibrillation goes back to flutter, what happens? You can see these are consecutive. The line of block forms. And now you see what that flutter. So the difference between atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter is a line of block. And the last thing I want to talk about, the last two things I want to talk about. Have I got time to go?
5 more minutes.
Okay. It'll take 5 minutes. I'll go very quickly. This is Barrett's lesson. Again, he's such a sensible guy. We'll get this done. But I'll summarize what he showed here. Is that when he introduces a premature beat and gets the shorter the coupling interval, he gets a different rhythm. First, if it's too long coupling interval, the interval from the one beat to the next, S1, S2, he gets no arrhythmia. He gets it earlier. He gets a repetitive response earlier still he gets flutter, earlier still he gets fibrillation. But without making, I'll go to this. I'll go to this. The constant was wavelength. Let me summarize. The constant was wavelength. You can look at the wavelength was shorter, you got fibrillation. The wavelength was longer, you got flutter. The wavelength was longer still, you got repetitive response. And that fibrillation really needs short wavelength. What is wavelength? It's conduction velocity times refractory period. And he suggested, and certainly in his models, with a vaguely, if you will, mediated acetylcholine mediated, the shorter the refractory period, the more likely it is to get inflammation. So a short wavelength is important. Taking into the next picture. Let me just show you this, and I'll end with this. Because this is also a messy concept, and it's a very good way to end it. So how do you put all this together, too? We're not going to throw out ablation much, we're going to have. It's a still evolving area. We have a lot more to learn, in my opinion. There's been a lot of empirical success, both surgically and with catheters, but it's a long way to go. But there's something else which is sort of very, very interesting. That's the concept of facilitation. And a bunch of us met on the Isle of Corporal some years ago to talk about where we're headed with research and fibrillation. And Alessi talked about facilitation. It's in that article, but I really think it's a seminal idea not to be appreciated. If the pulmonary veins are so important, and I think they really are for so many patients with atrial fibrillation, why doesn't everyone have atrial fibrillation? Why do you have pulmonary vein hypertension if you don't have anything? Well, when you look at the pulmonary vein hypertension with this, I connect them very short. 150 milliseconds. 120 milliseconds. The normal refractory period of the atria, 100 and 280 milliseconds. So what's going to happen with pulmonary vein hypertension? Most of the time, they'll be parasystolic. They can't get out. So, what might make them get out? Well, if you have a tachycardia, and it lasts for a while, and it's AV node reentrant tachycardia, or AV reentrant tachycardia, you have a rate of 180 or 200 beats per minute, and it goes for several hours. So when it stops, what happens? You have physiologic remodeling. Refractory is really short. Now the pulmonary vein potential to get out, you make fibrillation. In fact, a lot of them get out. Probably someone get out before anyway to induce the AV and arterial AVR because probably the PH for that. But now a whole lot of them can get out. Not just occasionally, but the refractory isn't 280 anymore, it's 120. Well, why does WPW have a 15% incidence of atrial fib? Why is it that if you ablate WPW, the fib goes away almost always? Well, because they get AVRT, and when the AVRT stops, those premature restop can get out and precipitate fibrillation. You get rid of the AVRT by getting rid of the accessory connections, so you ablate the AVRT. Now there's no more tachycardia, now there's no more facilitation, now it's single PACs sometimes, and that's it. So, what has that got to do then with other things? Well, how about the whole idea of the vaguely mediated atrial fibrillation? How many of you are aware that how important the vaguely mediated atrial fibrillation is? We see in athletes, Hakeem Olajuwon, atrial fibrillation. Larry Bird, atrial fibrillation. For years, I used to get called my friends in other cities, such and such team coming to play the Browns this weekend. You might get a call about this player and that player and that player that have vaguely mediated atrial fibrillation. Athletes get it. People with vagal dysautonomias, an abnormal, spontaneously abnormal situation. What does the vagus do? Shorts atrial refractoriness. What does that do? Facilitates the exit of pulmonary veins, I'm suggesting. So you begin to see, as you put some of this together, how the relation with fib and flutter, that really flutter is due to fib. But it has to have a line of block. No line of block forms in the cavity, it stays fib. Line of block forms in the cavity, 80% or so will go on to flutter. So, why now, if those of you follow the literature on ablation, there's a big fad now. I mean, a lot of it's very empirical. Ablating fat pads. What are fat pads? Fat pads are places in the atria that have autonomic plexus, ganglion, mostly vagal. But it doesn't matter, even the sympathetic. What does acetylcholine do? Short refractory. What do catechols do? Short atrial refractory. So you get rid of these fat pads, and they say, yeah, cures atrial fibrillation. Well, maybe it's dealing with facilitation. The other thing is to make all these lesions, maybe what they're doing is not isolating the trigger so much as putting a roadblock in a substrate, in a critical area of the substrate, so you can't get rotors, you can't get reentrant circuits. Maybe. Only it's so empirical, they don't know which one they put in. 80 or 100 burns here on target. It's not very common. But really not sure. It's very complex. So a lot of very good people are involved, both surgically and medically. If it was easy, they'd have solved it. We're happy with the gains they've made, by the way. This is not a knock, it's just a perspective. Recognize what it is. We are learning more and more from these empirical approaches. We have a lot more to learn. So I think you are missed my last slide. That was my last slide. So I thank you for your attention. This represents a lot of my work, but not only my work. I hope I gave you a lot about atrial fibrillation. But the relationship to other arrhythmias is important. It's all trying to give you that perspective too, and particularly flutter. Thank you very much.
The hour is late, but still, if people have any burning question, we'll take a few. If not, then you're welcome to talk to Waldo.
In your model, Al, on the right and left atria in the posterior pericarditis model, what's more important, inflammation of the epicardium of the right atrium or of the left atrium?
Well, we don't know because we do both. We've never done just one. I think that almost all the drivers, in fact all the drivers in our model, when we have a stable surgeon, it's always in the left atrium. And I don't think we get those drivers if they didn't have abnormal substrate. So I think the driver is the most important thing. But then again, also, when you have the sick substrate, it makes fluid conduction more likely to occur. We've done that too. If you pace the atria in a normal heart, you get one-to-one activation. We call it the fibrillary conduction threshold, 12 rooted semilunar. How fast a rate do you have to get to make fibrillation? And in the pericarditis model, it's a much longer cycle, a much slower rate to produce conduction abnormalities and fibrillary conduction. You know, conduction should not be regulated. You know that. You know, if you pace at 10 beats, 20 beats, 50 beats, 100 beats, the conduction on 18 sites should be the same because it had, unless you begin to encroach on depolarization, phase 3, your conduction time is constant. But when you have a sick tissue, back to the Sir Thomas Lewis idea of the normal heart or so arrhythmia, you have abnormal tissue, things change. And so I think it's thanks to all of it. I think substrate's critical and the drivers.
As I understand correctly, if you have repair of an atrial septal defect in a juvenile, are they going to inevitably deal with flutter or fibrillation later in life?
Sometimes early in life. And the juvenile, it's less likely because the atria are not as big. But the trouble is that some of them, when they get operated, the atria was already big from the lesion. If the atria is really big, they're set up for it. And so a lot of it, we tried to get surgeons to make the lesion differently. Instead of making it this way, parallel to the crystal terminalis, to make it perpendicular to it, or or to make at least to make a lesion in the subluxation isthmus, so they don't have to flutter that way, and to not leave a line of block around which the lesions are to form so-called lesion reentry. But most surgeons don't see it all that often. They don't have to deal with it later, so it's not too pressing. I tried to get Kirkman to do that a long time ago. He was interested in everything. There was a giant. He said, if we're going to do it, we got to set up to a good job, which is fair enough. But you got a giant like Kirkman. He's a great man. Richie, nice to see you.
Same here. You were talking about the concept of block between SVC and IVC. Have you, or how often in your model, or have you ever seen where you have flutter going on the right side with a nice line of block, but since there's limited conduction over to the left side, the fib goes on the left side? It's a reversal.
Yeah, I can ask that question. I think, some people suggested that. The paper I read is a famous paper from Doug Zipes, which was just an incorrect interpretation of what fibrillation was. He thought that all fibrillation had to be chaotic and had a fraction in it. So when he was calling flutter, it was not flutter. And it was really just fibrillation. Physiological variability being what it is, I'll bet you something like that sometimes happens, and it's very unusual.
It's the other one.
And the other thing that's also interesting to me about this is that the old notion, we were talking about Walter Gary, it was Gary who suggested that you needed a critical mass to have fibrillation. And he showed it in ventricle, in dying ventricle, in brains. And the atria, it's been pretty well assumed that was the same thing. And we know that if a horse fibrillates, you can't even defibrillate. famous story about Boris Schirau was he was infected with dinner or something. But you can't, and you can't fibrillate mice or rats. Your HA never fibrillate. And even only a knockout, when I think when they get rid of some connection, some people with pain to get it, but you have to have something really bad. But what I'm suggesting is that if we're right about the driver, that Gary's concept of fibrillation and the atrial fibrillation is not correct. That it isn't a critical mass, it's a critical cycling. And you have to have something to generate some critical stuff. But if bulk radiance of wavelets is operative, then I think a critical mass probably is correct.
Okay, well, thank you again.